oil portrait of Johnny Depp, the man behind the mascara. Every year, early March brings a mild and pleasant spring. But this week, Los Angeles has been gripped by a relentless heat wave. Extreme heat alerts flash on mobile phones. Today's peak hits 37 degrees Celsius. Inside the studio, the air warms in sympathy with the rising temperatures outside. Today, I will spend roughly 3 to 4 hours completing an oil portrait of an American actor, producer, and musician, Johnny Christopher Depp II. This is a process of painting, but also a deep dive into the chapters of Johnny Depp's life. To capture the unexpected essence of this specific period, I focus my brush on sensory details, the scent of tobacco, the resonance of a slide guitar, and the psychological rootlessness that defined his youth. Johnny Depp is an actor I admire, the man with eyes rimmed in mascara who captured the world's gaze with his singular charisma. His story isn't just a Hollywood biography, it is a Gothic novel being written in real time. He is the ultimate outsider who, by some twist of fate, became the ultimate insider. From the smoke-filled clubs of Florida to the courtrooms of Virginia, his life has swung like a pendulum between avant-garde artistic pursuits and the chaotic turbulence of celebrity life. We often perceive him through his roles, the lonely stranger with scissor hands, the drunken pirate captain, the chocolate factory owner, but who is the man hidden behind the hats, the scarves, and the layers of rings? Today, we explore the 40-year odyssey of John Christopher Depp II. The Mansu Pucky Boy and the Mahogany Shield. Before the world knew the razor-sharp cheekbones, the signature eyeliner, or the pirate's swagger, he was simply John Christopher Depp II. To truly understand Johnny, one must first understand his restless youth. Born in 1963 in Owensboro, Kentucky, he was the youngest of 4 children in a family driven by a strange kinetic unease. His father, John Sr., was a civil engineer. His mother, Betty Sue Palmer, was a waitress, whom Johnny later described as a hellcat, fierce-tempered, yet not without humor. To read Johnny Depp, you must first understand the volatile migratory soil of his childhood, the nomad of the bluegrass state. The Depp family didn't just move, they migrated. By the time Johnny was 15, the family had packed their lives into countless cardboard boxes and changed addresses over 20 times. They drifted from one rental to another, sometimes across town, sometimes across state lines, to Florida. This endless cycle of packing and unpacking left a profound mark on the young boy's soul. He never had the chance to take root to be the local kid on the corner. He was always the misfit, the new kid in the back of the class with messy hair and a gaze of detachment. This lack of a permanent home created a vacuum within him, a void that Johnny would eventually fill with character and music. The Gospel of the Sixth String, the true turning point happened on a film set, but in a garage. When Johnny was 12, his mother bought him a secondhand Decca acoustic guitar for $25. In that moment, the trajectory of his life shifted irrevocably. The second I got that guitar, I didn't leave my room for a year. For a child who felt out of place in the traditional social structures of the 1970s, the guitar was more than an instrument, it was a talisman. He locked himself away to escape the domestic turbulence of his parents' marriage and the suffocating boredom of suburban Florida. He never had a formal teacher. Instead, he would drop the needle on a record, pick out the notes by ear, and practice until his fingertips bled and calloused. In the raw energy of blues and garage rock, he found a peculiar religion. This was his first taste of transformation. With a guitar in his arms, he was no longer the stuttering, shy kid or the waitress's son. He became a vessel for sound, a conduit for music. From the Church of the Electric Slide, an often overlooked detail of his youth was his deep bond with his grandfather, whom he affectionately called Pawpaw. A full-blooded Cherokee, Pawpaw was the only pillar that made Johnny feel grounded and safe. During the sweltering Kentucky summers, they would spend hours on the porch, sometimes picking berries, sometimes just basking in the silence. When his grandfather passed away, Johnny lost his North Star. Shortly after, through a cousin who was a preacher, Johnny found a new kind of spiritual outlet. In a small, muggy Florida church, he witnessed his cousin leading a gospel band. The music was deafening. The congregation seemed possessed by the Holy Spirit. Hands raised, voices trembling, bodies swaying as if something unseen had taken hold. The electric passion and the power of music to transport a crowd into another dimension shook him to his core. He didn't want the pulpit. He wanted the amplifier. The Kids and Sunset Strip. At 15, Johnny dropped out of high school. Legend has it, when he told the principal he was leaving, the principal said, "Go, follow your dream." He did. He took that advice, literally. He joined a band called The Kids as the lead guitarist. They became local legends in the South Florida punk and new wave scene. In the band, Johnny was the quiet one in the back, hidden behind a mane of hair and a cigarette, eyes glued to the fretboard. He had no desire to be the frontman, no hunger for the spotlight. He only wanted the light to fall on his hands, on his fingers moving, flying across the strings. The road to Los Angeles. The band packed into a beat-up van and headed west to Los Angeles, convinced they would be the next big thing. The reality was cold. They lived on taco runs, buying the cheapest food they could find and splitting it 4 ways. Broke, and desperate, Johnny reportedly took a job as a telemarketer selling pens, using different voices to trick people into bulk ordering customized ballpoints, a performer before he even knew he was one. The encounter that changed everything. Fate, however, had written a different script. While Johnny struggled in Los Angeles, his first wife, Lori Ann Allison, to a young, eccentric actor, Nicolas Cage. Cage, already somewhat established, spent a night playing cards and drinking with Johnny. He looked at him, at those piercing eyes, that quiet intensity, that unmistakable presence, and saw something. I think you're a natural actor. You've got it. Johnny. He waved it off. I'm a musician. But his band was falling apart, the rent was due, and his guitar case was empty. Rebellion, under the teen idol halo, a commodity trapped in a poster in 1987 as 21 Jump Street swept the nation's ratings. A young Johnny Depp found himself trapped in a surreal nightmare. To millions of teenagers, he was perfection. Deep eyes, tousled curls, a brooding bad boy silhouette. But to Depp, Officer Tom Hansen felt like a label, packaged, printed on lunchboxes, on posters, on the glossy covers of teen magazines. I felt like a piece of meat. Under the studio's calculations, his smile, his clothes, even his silence were measured, quantified, and sold. The silent rebellion. In that era, Hollywood followed a rigid logic. If you were handsome, you didn't need to act. If you were an idol, you had to remain flawless. This identity suffocated him, so he began a quiet rebellion. On set, he twisted his performance, adding oddities, awkward pauses, subtle distortions. Sometimes he tried to look less handsome, less perfect, more human. He didn't want to be anyone's Prince Charming, to be wanted, be an actor. or more precisely, a soul that could breathe. And for the meeting of souls, just as searched for a way out, another outsider entered his life. Um, Tim Burton, wild hair, restless eyes, a mind filled with shadows and strange beauty. Their first meeting took place in a quiet hotel coffee shop, two men who didn't belong finally recognizing each other. Edward Scissorhands, The Awakening, 1990. Uh, this was not just a film, it was a confession, a transformation. Depp shattered the teen idol mask. He covered his face in pale makeup, scarred his skin, hid himself inside cold, heavy leather. And in doing so, he revealed more truth than ever before. With fewer than 170 words in the entire film, he spoke louder than ever. The eyes that spoke, through those eyes, wide, fragile, terrified, and unbearably gentle, he told the world, I am not just a face, I am not just a role. I have a heart that trembles. And for the first time, the listened, the bond that shaped him. From that moment on, Tim Burton was no longer just a director. He became a kindred spirit, an artistic mirror. Together, they would build worlds of dark fairy tales, stories of outsiders, misfits, and beautiful broken souls. So, the anti-Hollywood path, success did not pull Depp toward the mainstream. It pushed him away from it. While others chased blockbusters, fame, and invincible heroes, and Depp chose the opposite. He stepped into smaller films, quieter stories, characters who were flawed, forgotten, or quietly falling apart. Choosing the broken, in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, he became a young man trapped in stillness, carrying a life that refused to move. He stood beside a young Leonardo DiCaprio, not to outshine him, but to serve the story, because truth mattered more than spotlight. The Mirror of Ed Wood. In Ed Wood, he became the so-called worst director in film history. But Depp didn't play him as a joke. He played him as a believer, a man who would create no matter how loudly the world laughed, because deep down, that was him. Elegy, under the neon of the 80s, was a drifting outsider. Then the Depp of the 90s became something else, something dangerous. It was a decade of cigarette smoke, of grunge, broken hearts, and beneath the neon lights of Sunset Boulevard, a story was waiting to unfold. The sanctuary called the Viper Room. In 1993, Depp purchased a nightclub, the Viper Room, but it wasn't just a club. It was a sanctuary, a place he tried to build for the lost, artists, musicians, souls pushed out by Hollywood's rules. Here, Depp was not a star. He was a musician, a presence in the room. He would take the stage, guitar in hand, and disappear into the sound. A kindred spirit, River Phoenix. And it was here that he met one of the brightest and purest souls in Hollywood, River Phoenix. They were kindred spirits, both confused by fame, both in love with poetry, both chasing something the world could not name. Depp saw in River a reflection of himself, but cleaner, untouched, not yet worn down by the machine. The night everything changed. Then came the night before Halloween, 1993. The sanctuary became a crime scene. River collapsed outside the club. An overdose. He was 23. Inside, Depp was there, listening to the sound of ambulance sirens cutting through the night. That sound never left him. In that moment, the illusion of Hollywood was torn completely away. Grief and silence. After that night, something shifted. Something closed. In memory of River, Depp shut down the club every Halloween, year after year, until he finally let it go in 2004. River's death left behind more than grief. It left fear, a fear of what fame could, fear of what it demanded in return. And so he retreated into alcohol, into silence, into himself. A wild romance. Kate Moss, then came a different kind of storm. In 1994, in a New York cafe, two worlds collided, Johnny Depp and Kate Moss. The media called them the coolest couple in the world. Black leather, messy hair, half-lidded eyes. They were icons. But beneath the surface, they were fragile. Two people too sensitive, too intense for the world they were living in. The night, the mark. One night, September 1994, the police arrived at a hotel in New York, the Mark. Reports of violence, smashing, breaking. Inside, they found Depp sitting calmly, smoking, surrounded by ruin. Furniture destroyed, carpets torn, glass shattered. When questioned, he said, "An armadillo did it. It was hiding in the closet. I was just trying to catch it. It was absurd." But also completely him. Their love was the same. Intense, explosive, beautiful, and destructive. In 1998, it ended. And for years, she would say, no one ever cared for her the way he did. Fall from Grace and the Courtroom Trial. If Hollywood's pantheon had a statue for the most rule-breaking god, it was Johnny Depp. Yet, the wind shifted, violently. In the mid-2010s, a perfect storm began to gather. Law, media, public opinion, all converging into a single, unstoppable force. And the former golden boy was dragged into the mire. The legal mire. From London to Virginia, Depp's fall was not sudden. It was slow, public, unforgiving. In 2020, inside the High Court in London, the world was invited, no, compelled to witness the wreckage of a life once mythologized. Depp sued the Sun for calling him a wife-beater, a dangerous gamble, because under UK law, the burden tilts toward the press. And so the courtroom became something else entirely. A chamber of exposure, private messages, audio recordings, fragments of anger, addiction, despair, all spilled into daylight, headlines turned into weapons. And when the verdict came, it was devastating. The court ruled the claims were substantially true, not just a legal defeat, a moral branding, a scar burned into public memory. But he did not disappear. He did not vanish. Instead, he crossed the ocean. In 2022, the battlefield shifted to Virginia. This time, he sued his ex-wife, Amber Heard, over an op-ed in the Washington Post. But this trial was different. Cameras were allowed. Every glance, every pause, every flicker of expression, broadcast, streamed, clipped, shared. A courtroom transformed into a global stage, a 6-week spectacle. And the world watched endlessly. The jury sided with Depp on most counts, a form of vindication, a reversal. But the cost? Total exposure. Every scar opened, every weakness magnified for all to see. The trial of public opinion, the digital coliseum. If the courtroom was the arena, the internet was the coliseum. For the first time in history, a private tragedy became global entertainment. On TikTok, on Twitter, on YouTube, moments of pain were edited into humor. Cross-examinations turned into memes. Facial expressions looped, analyzed, mocked. The public was no longer watching. They were participating, judging, choosing sides, creating narratives. Hashtags surged, justice for Johnny Depp, billions of views. Even the smallest details, a gesture, a bite of gummy candy became content. And while sympathy returned, something else was lost. Permanently. Mystery. The veil that once surrounded a star was gone. The aftermath and the cost in Hollywood, reputation is currency. And when it collapses, everything follows. After the London verdict, Warner Bros. Made their move. Depp was asked to step down from Fantastic Beasts. His role, Gellert Grindelwald, replaced. Quietly, efficiently. Then came the deeper wound. Disney. The house that built Jack Sparrow slowly distanced itself. The icon remained, but the man behind it was removed. In court, Depp would later say, even for $300 million and a million alpacas, he would not return. Contracts disappeared, endorsements faded, trust eroded. Financial losses mounted, legal fees, lost roles, years of uncertainty. The crown did not fall in a single moment. It dissolved. Gendeber Return of the King, or Silent Resistance. May 2023. The air thick with salt and expensive perfume. When Johnny Depp stepped onto the red carpet at the Grand Théâtre Lumière, the flashes were relentless, so frequent they blurred into something unreal, as if time itself hesitated. He wore a dark, tailored suit, hair tied back, eyes calm, steady, observing the chaos without being consumed by it. This was not Captain Jack Sparrow, not Edward Scissorhands. This was Louis XV, a king history remembers as mediocre yet charming. And for Depp, this role was something else entirely, a return, or perhaps a quiet refusal to disappear. In Jean de Barry, his performance is restrained, minimal. He speaks little. Instead, he chooses stillness. Against the gilded weight of Versailles, his face tells the story, drooping eyes, fine lines carved by time, a silence that feels earned. Show, don't tell. There is a moment near the end. On a deathbed, the king looks at his lover. He does not cry. His fingers barely tremble against lace cuffs, and in that gesture, there is exhaustion, power drained of meaning, a quiet longing for something real. The audience no longer sees a king. They see a man, and perhaps the man behind the man. When the film ended, the applause began. It did not stop. 7 minutes, standing, unbroken. Depp lowered his head, eyes glistening, not triumph, not victory. Something softer, recognition from a place that still believes art matters. The present and the future. If film is his battlefield, then art and music are his refuge. After Cannes, he did not rush back. No explosion of contracts, no grand return to blockbusters. Instead, he stepped sideways toward control, toward creation, toward silence, rock soul. On stage with Alice Cooper and Joe Perry in the band Hollywood Vampires, Depp becomes someone else, or perhaps more himself than ever. A worn guitar, silver rings, dim lights, no courtroom, no headlines, just sound. The guitar roars, and in that roar there is release. Catharsis, a language older than fame, a new perspective, he returns to directing. The film Modi, a story about Amedeo Modigliani, the artist who died misunderstood, unrecognized, called a failure. The parallels are not subtle. In Budapest, Depp is no longer the subject. He watches, shapes, frames. He becomes the observer, and perhaps that is where peace begins. The legacy, victim, villain, or mortal. As the noise fades, interpretations remain. 3 versions, 3 truths. The victim, a symbol of resistance, a man broken by public judgment. The villain, a fallen idol, talent shadowed by chaos. And then the third, the most human, a man brilliant, fractured, unfinished, like the antiques he collects, valuable and marked by cracks. Conclusion, the unfinished canvas. Today, he lives mostly in Europe. At night, he paints. In quiet rooms, he brings faces back to life. Marlon Brando, Keith Richards, friends, heroes, ghosts of inspiration. His legacy will not be decided by a verdict, nor a headline, nor a single role. It will be defined by something else. Refusal. A refusal to be simplified, to be contained, to be owned. Because even after exile, he found a way to rebuild. Not through approval, but through creation. And when asked in Cannes whether he felt abandoned by Hollywood, he answered simply, "I don't think about Hollywood. I don't have much further need for Hollywood." Whether the king has returned does not matter. What matters is this. He has found the man who holds the brush, who plucks the strings, and who finally directs the scene. There is something quietly arresting about this portrait. At first glance, it is simply a face, but stay with it for just a moment longer, and it begins to look back at you. The brushwork is deliberate, not overly refined, not overly loose. Each stroke carries weight as if it remembers something. The planes of the face are carved not only by light, but by time. Look closely at the eyes. They do not perform, they do not charm, they observe. There is a stillness here, but not the stillness of peace. It is the stillness of someone who has seen too much and chosen not to explain it. The shadows gather around the eyes and cheekbones like quiet witnesses. They are not merely tonal decisions, they are emotional architecture. The palette remains restrained, earth tones, muted grays, faint warmth beneath the skin. There is no theatrical color, no dramatic flourish, and yet the restraint itself becomes the drama. This is not a portrait of performance. It is a portrait of residue. What remains after the roles have faded, after the applause has dissolved, after the noise has finally gone quiet. The mouth is set, but not rigid. There is a tension there, as if words have been considered and then withheld. And perhaps that is the essence of this painting, not expression, but containment. The hair, loosely rendered, almost dissolving into the background, suggests movement, but also fragmentation, as if identity itself is no longer a fixed shape, but something shifting, something worn, something remembered, rather than defined. And then the light, soft, directional, falling gently across the face, but never fully illuminating it. This is important because the light does not reveal everything. It refuses clarity. It allows mystery to remain intact. There is dignity here, but it is not the polished dignity of celebrity. It is something quieter, something earned, a kind of dignity that comes from surviving contradiction. If you step back, the painting feels almost cinematic, like a paused frame from a story that never truly ends. A man caught somewhere between myth and memory. Not the icon, not the character, but the space in between. And that space is where this portrait lives. What makes this work compelling is not likeness alone. It is not accuracy. It is not even style. It is honesty. Not a loud honesty, but a restrained one, a quiet acknowledgement that behind every constructed image there is a human presence, fragile, complex, and impossible to fully capture. And yet this painting comes close, not by explaining, but by suggesting, not by revealing, but by allowing us to feel. In the end, this is not just a portrait. It is a conversation between the artist and the subject, between the subject and himself. And now, between the painting and us. We are not asked to judge, we are not asked to conclude, only to look and to remain for a moment longer in that quiet space where identity softens and something more human begins to emerge. And when we finally turn away, the image does not leave us. It lingers. Like a memory we cannot quite place, but somehow understand. And in the end, this painting remains unfinished, not in a careless way, but in a living way. There are areas where the surface has been washed back, where decisions have been undone, softened, reconsidered. Traces of hesitation, quiet revisions still linger beneath the paint. And there are parts that are not yet resolved, edges that hesitate, forms that are still searching for their final weight. But perhaps this is not a flaw. Perhaps this is the most honest part of the work. Because painting, like memory, does not arrive fully formed. It shifts, it returns, it corrects itself again and again. What we see here is not only an image, but a process, a record of looking, a record of doubt, a record of trying to understand. And maybe that is enough. Thank you for staying, for watching, for allowing this moment to unfold slowly. And now there is nothing more to explain. Only time, only patience, only the quiet rhythm of the brush. Let us leave the words behind and return to the canvas. For the rest of this moment, we will let the music speak and allow the painting to find its own ending.